I'm a teacher at Columbine High School. There is a student here with a gun.
He's inside the school shooting at the gun!
Well, I had to do it because somebody had to do something.
After shooting in the theater, I didn't have a plan of whether to die or not.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new here. Today's case is another member-suggested one, so thank you to Pittsburgh Pirates Hat for suggesting this harrowing case. If you would like a chance to suggest a topic of a future video, please check out my memberships in the description or pinned comment below. As you can tell by the title, today we will be talking about the Tree of Life Synagogue shooting that took place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on October 27, 2018. As always, I will kick this video off by talking about the life of the shooter prior to the attack, which in this case is pretty depressing. Robert Gregory Bowers was born on September 4, 1972. His life was marked with hardship and trauma from a very young age. His parents' marriage did not last long after he was born, with them getting divorced when he was only around a year old. When he was around 3 years old, his mom got remarried, and with her new spouse, they all moved to Florida. This relationship didn't last long either, as they separated after only 1 year. I read that this ex-husband went on to be convicted of child molestation later in life, and was apparently sentenced to 17 years in prison. When Robert was 7 years old, his father, Randall, committed suicide while awaiting trial for a rape charge. According to the New York Times, Randall followed a young woman from a pizza shop to her car before grabbing the wheel and climbing inside. She drove off, but only made it about 3 miles before stopping and attempting to escape. Randall threatened to kill her, and then proceeded to sexually assault her as she screamed for help. Thankfully, the police were called, and they actually showed up while Randall was still committing the act. This attack took place about a mile away from where Robert would later commit the mass shooting. Anyway, after they arrested Randall, he was let out on a $4,500 bond. Randall failed to show up to his court appearance, and so a warrant was issued for his arrest. Eventually, after searching far and wide for him, Randall was found deceased on October 21, 1979. He had a gunshot wound to his chest, and his death was ruled a suicide. It's safe to say that Robert's childhood was filled with hardship and complete uncertainty. By the age of only 10 years old, Robert was already displaying suicidal tendencies. In fact, a few of his teachers in elementary school later stated that it was clear that Robert needed some sort of help, but that his mother would either ignore or reject the idea. He reportedly had trouble socializing and showed concerning emotional behavior. Robert and his mom, Barbara, ended up moving back to Pennsylvania together and began to live with her parents. Barbara reportedly had health problems that limited her ability to take care of him, so his grandparents stepped up to help raise him. His life did not improve during this time, and it's clear to see that it only went further downhill. It's reported that Robert was hospitalized multiple times in his youth over several suicide attempts, aggressive behavior, and fire-setting tendencies. During an especially concerning incident while he was in 8th grade, Robert apparently chased his mother and attempted to spray her with aerosol and ignite it, which landed him in the adult psychiatric ward at McKeesport Hospital in September of 1985, when he was only 13 years old. He moved around to several hospitals during this time, and after 10 months, he was released in June of 1986. His issues didn't stop there though, and he certainly wasn't cured. He was again committed into hospitals due to additional suicide attempts in his late teen years. Robert dropped out of high school at some point, though I don't know exactly when this was. After that, he took up a job as a trucker. In 1990, when he was around 18 years old, he was hospitalized once again due to suicide attempts. Then again, in 2004, he was involuntarily committed. As you can clearly see, Robert's life before the shooting was anything but positive. Though this is the case, it is reported that he never got into trouble with law enforcement and was completely unknown to them for his entire life. Though Robert was described by neighbors as very quiet in person, the same could not be said when he was using the internet. Robert's online presence was majorly concerning, but I will be talking about the majority of it later in the video. I will just briefly touch on it now. Sometime in January of 2018, Robert created an account on Gab, which is a social network that is reportedly popular among white nationalists. While his online activity was certainly worrisome, it would not compare to the real-life action Bowers was about to take against the community of the people he despised. With that, let's jump into the shooting after I give you a quick explanation of the target. The Tree of Life Synagogue is a Jewish religious establishment located in the Squirrel Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In this particular synagogue, there were 3 congregations using the building in 2018. Those congregations were, of course, the Tree of Life, New Light, and Dor Hadash, each occupying a different part of the building. On the cold and gloomy morning of Saturday, October 27, 2018, all 3 separate congregations practicing in the synagogue were preparing to begin their services. On that morning, there were a little over 20 occupants in the building. Shortly before the attack, Bowers made an online post alluding to the events that were to follow. He wrote, quote, "Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society likes to bring invaders in that kill our people. I can't sit by and watch my people get slaughtered. Screw your optics, I'm going in," unquote. It was about 9:50 a.m. when a horrific plan was set into motion. Robert Gregory Bowers parked his car outside and entered the building, heavily armed with a Colt AR-15 semi-automatic rifle and 3 Glock 357 SIG semi-automatic pistols, all of which would be fired off inside of the synagogue. Immediately upon entering the building through the main entrance, Bowers began to discharge one of his firearms. Upon these shots ringing off, those who were grouped in the main chapel and basement heard the commotion, but didn't think much of it at first. Shortly after Bowers first opened fire, brothers Cecil and David Rosenthal were both shot and killed.
The complainant says they have an active shooter in the building. A second call says they are being attacked. They have shotguns.
The first 911 calls came in at 9:54, and police were immediately dispatched to the scene of the attack. After taking shots in the entrance, Bowers then descended the stairs to the basement, where the New Light congregation was gathered. Upon hearing the shots, Dan Ledger and Jerry Rabinowitz, who were both medical professionals, sprung into action in hopes of being able to help with the clearly horrific situation. Dan later stated, quote, "Jerry and I looked at each other. Jerry's a doctor, I'm a nurse. Our instincts are counter to what everyone is trained to do and should do, and I encourage them to do, and that is to run, hide, and fight in that order. But Jerry and I thought that somehow we could be helpful, and so we moved in the direction of the gunfire," unquote. Unfortunately, they were both shot in the process, with Jerry passing away from his injuries, and Dan being left injured as a result. Dan went on to say, quote, "Jerry was killed, and I was shot, and I knew that it was very likely that I was going to be dead in a few minutes. I was on the stairs, and I didn't feel afraid at that point. I had no sense of being afraid about the end of my life coming. I thought about my life, and I thought, gee, I've had a wonderful life. My life has been so good. I'm so grateful for it, you know," unquote. A woman who was a part of the New Light congregation, which was currently being held in the basement, Carol Black, later recalled the beginning of the attack, quote, "I came in, and I was a little bit late, and so I went down the steps into our sanctuary space. I could hear my brother and Dan Stein in the kitchen. The rabbi was in the front on the right, and Barry Werber was sitting right in front of where I was sitting, and Mel was leading the service. And I was getting my tallis bag out. I was just getting prepared. And I was holding the tallis bag in my hand, and I heard the first gunshot, although I didn't recognize it as a gunshot," unquote. She continued on, quote, "I didn't know what it was. I thought somebody dropped a metal table on a floor or something. I didn't know what it was. We all heard the sound and then didn't think too much of it. And then, less than a minute later, there was another one. And I said, 'What are they doing up there?' And Barry got up out of the seat, walked out, looked up the steps. He came back in and he said, 'There's somebody laying on the steps.' And then he sat back down, and it just wasn't occurring to us what was happening. And then I heard bam, 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 you know, the rapid gunfire. And the rabbi said, 'We need to get out of here,' and he motioned us towards a doorway that was in the back," unquote. After taking a moment to think about what was happening, and now understanding the immense danger they were in, they decided to hide. 3 of the members, Melvin Wax, Carol Black, and Barry Werber, chose to take cover in a pitch-black closet located in the basement. Carol stated, quote, "I had never been in that space before. I didn't know what was there. It was pitch black in there. There was no lights. I couldn't see a thing. And I saw a closet with the door propped open and I went into the closet. Barry went into the closet," unquote. Barry Werber stated, quote, "By that time we knew there was shooting, and I had my cell phone out, and I called 911. Now, there were places in that building where you couldn't get any cell phone reception, especially in the basement, but 911 went through," unquote. Not long into their hiding, Melvin decided to peek out of the door to see if he could see anything. Barry recalled this happening, quote, "I'm pressed up against a wall, and Mel is in front of us, and there seemed to be a pause, and Mel went and pushed the door. We couldn't say anything, we were afraid of making any sound. And Mel pushed the door open, and I heard 3 gunshots, and he fell back in the room," unquote. Within seconds, Melvin was shot and killed by Bowers, who was unbeknownst to him, outside of the door. Barry continued his statement, quote, "There was a little bit of light from the sanctuary area, and the gunman walked in. I couldn't see too much. I could see the long gun, I knew the type, and he stepped over Mel, couldn't see anything, and I have 911 in my ear yelling at me, trying to get me to say something, and I couldn't breathe. And then he stepped back out of the door, and the door closed," unquote. The remaining occupants in the closet stayed completely silent, knowing that their lives depended on it. Miraculously, Bowers failed to notice that there were other people who were also hidden in the closet at that time, and he moved on. 2 other people were killed in the basement kitchen. It wasn't long before Bowers returned back to the ground floor of the building and made his way to the larger service, held by the main congregation, Tree of Life. A few of the worshippers had escaped the room by that point, but several of them remained in the chapel, reportedly not having enough time to get out. Upon entry, Bowers opened fire on the remaining members, striking all of them. Only one of the people in the chapel ended up surviving. The woman who survived, Andrea Wedner, later recalled the events. She said, quote, "We couldn't run. We were in the back, in our seats. And I just told my mother, I said, 'Just get down.' I think we both got shot before we went down," unquote. She went on to say, quote, "I just laid on the floor. I didn't move. And I was bleeding a lot. I think I must have been in shock. My mother was lying right by me, and I couldn't look. I just stayed there until somebody came through," unquote. She continued on saying, quote, "When I got up, I just told my mother I loved her, and I had to go. I had to live. I knew she wasn't going to survive," unquote. Another woman stuck in the chapel was 84-year-old Bernice Simon, along with her husband Sylvan, who was shot. She was on the phone with a 911 dispatcher while trying to stop his bleeding and was also shot. Unfortunately, they would both pass away as a result of gunshot wounds. Though accounts vary on who exactly reported hearing it, many sources state that during the shooting, Bowers could be heard shouting, quote, "All Jews must die," unquote. After he felt satisfied, Bowers attempted to exit the building, but was met with a heavy police presence outside. He began to shoot at them, and upon receiving returning fire, Bowers retreated back into the building.
Fuck!
Come on, get out of here!
Fucking blasted me! Fuck!
Get out of here!
Fuck! In the front fucking door! Fuck!
Come on, go this way!
Fuck! Fuck! Fuck!
Before the threat was over, first responders made the brave decision to enter the building in hopes of saving any wounded people, despite the immense risk it posed for their own lives. Dan Ledger recalls the moment he was rescued, saying, quote, "All of a sudden, I see a camouflaged pant leg on the stairs next to me, and I grabbed the pant leg. It was a paramedic, and, he said, 'This one's alive,' unquote." Eventually, heavily armored officers made entry to the building, determined to eliminate the threat. This is when another firefight took place. Bowers was injured during this exchange and retreated up to a room on the 3rd floor. It is unclear if he suffered wounds from the police or somehow injured himself. A little past 11 o'clock, over an hour after the shooting began, Bowers finally crawled out of the room and surrendered himself to authorities. After his capture, according to many of the officers, Bowers repeatedly said things like, quote, "All Jews need to die. Jews are killing our kids. Jews are bringing immigrants and killing our people and committing genocide. Jews are the children of Satan," unquote. When all was said and done, 11 people lost their lives in this horrific attack, and 6 more were injured. According to Rabbi Jonathan Perlman, about half of the building's occupants were killed. Following the shooting, Bowers was charged with 29 federal counts, including 11 counts of using a firearm to commit murder, and 11 counts of obstructing the exercise of religious beliefs resulting in death. Now let's dive deeper into Bowers' previous internet presence. On his site of choice, Gab, he went by the name of One Dingo. Bowers' account has since been deactivated, so not many of his posts' contents are public, but as we will soon find out, he made numerous racist posts. On this account, Bowers often went into his extremely sickening anti-Semitic views and discussed certain conspiracy theories with other users, such as the Great Replacement Theory, which is a conspiracy theory that immigrants are slowly replacing white people to the point of extinction. He also apparently made his admiration for Adolf Hitler clear on his page, and also unsurprisingly spoke approvingly of the Nazi extermination of Jewish people. It's also reported that shortly preceding the attack, Bowers spoke about how people of European descent are the, quote, chosen ones, unquote. He also stated that Jewish people were the enemy, and that anyone who wasn't a part of a certain ethnic and racial group needed to be exterminated from the world. I find this to be incredibly ironic, considering the fact that he believed immigrants were planning the same thing for white people, and he had a major problem with that. Allegedly, Bowers once made a post that stated, quote, "Open your eyes, it's the filthy evil Jews bringing the filthy evil Muslims into the country," unquote. He also wrote, quote, "Jews are the children of Satan," unquote. One image that he shared read, quote, "The only good Jew is a dead Jew," unquote. I'm sure you don't even have to take a guess that Bowers was incredibly racist and completely against the idea of immigration. The reason that Bowers chose this specific synagogue is because one of the congregations that practiced in the building, Dor Hadash, was involved with the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. It's pretty much in the name, but HIAS is a program that helped to settle immigrants into the United States. It's clear to see why Bowers would have a problem with this organization. According to SPLcenter.org, in the 19 days before the shooting took place, Bowers made at least 68 posts or reposts to his account on Gab. One of the posts from another user that he reposted read, quote, "Jews are waging a propaganda war against Western civilization, and it is so effective that we are headed towards certain extinction within the next 200 years, and we're not even aware of it. You are living in a critical time in history, where the internet has given us a small window of opportunity to snap our people out of their brainwash," unquote. With all of that horrific internet activity out of the way, let's now talk about the trial process. Bowers' first court appearance took place on October 29, 2018, only 2 days after the massacre. A few days later, he was indicted on 44 counts. He quickly pleaded not guilty to all of his charges. In January of 2019, a federal grand jury hit him with more charges, bringing his total up to 63. Later that year, in October of 2019, his offer to plead guilty in exchange for life in prison without parole was rejected. The federal prosecutors on the case instead wanted to pursue the death penalty. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, Bowers' trial was very delayed. Jumping forward to April of 2023, Bowers' legal team accused the Department of Justice of arbitrarily deciding when to pursue the death penalty. According to the motion that they filed, other similar cases had not had the same treatment when it came to the death penalty being sought out. Their motion was ultimately denied. Bowers' trial finally began on May 30th, 2023, over 4 years after he ended the lives of 11 innocent people. His defense team immediately began trying to prevent him from receiving the death penalty, acknowledging that Bowers had indeed committed the attack. In this last-ditch effort to spare Bowers of execution, His defense team suggested that Bowers did not commit the attack out of religious hatred, but rather his deeply delusional belief, rooted in mental illness, that Jews were going to put an end to the Caucasian race. Along with this, the defense brought up Bowers' extremely traumatic childhood. Over 11 days, numerous witnesses, survivors, and emergency response personnel were called to the stand by the prosecution. One of the 911 operators was called to the stand, where she described hearing the last moments of 84-year-old Bernice Simon's life as she pleaded for help while attempting to stop her husband Sylvan's wounds from bleeding. On June 16th, the jury returned from deliberating and announced that they found Bowers guilty on all 63 charges against him, making him eligible for the death penalty. 10 days later, the sentencing phase of his trial commenced. His scarred history, along with his numerous hospitalizations, were brought up at this point in his court process as well. As expected, the prosecution pushed for the death penalty, while the defense continued to try and prevent that, asking for him to receive life in prison instead. They reportedly argued that Bowers suffered from a brain abnormality. They even brought in medical experts to testify that Bowers' warped mindset and psychotic delusions stemmed from a brain impairment, which resulted in his twisted way of thinking. To Bowers, the Jewish community were aiding in bringing immigrants into the country, which would ultimately lead to a white genocide. Bowers continued to stand by his actions, stating that his actions were heroic, necessary, and that the attack deserved to be celebrated. It also came out that Bowers had initially planned to target a Jewish community center, but after looking into this location, he realized that there was a police station too close by, so he decided to target the Tree of Life Synagogue instead. The defense called a psychologist, Dr. Richard Rogers, to testify. He had previously evaluated Bowers in 2022 and had insight into his mental health issues. Dr. Rogers called Bowers blatantly psychotic, among other things. During their previous meeting, Bowers apparently blamed Jews for importing invaders who were killing thousands of white people, which certainly supports his previous claims. During the sentencing trial, Dr. Rogers testified that Bowers wholeheartedly believed that his actions on October 27, 2018, which ended in 11 deaths, were not only right, but necessary. Another medical professional, a neurologist named Siddhartha Nadkarni, also testified during the sentencing trial. Dr. Nadkarni stated that Bowers suffered from both schizophrenia and epilepsy. Dr. Nadkarni had also previously met with Bowers, and the doctor also stated that Bowers made references to his anti-Semitic views. On August 2, 2023, the jury recommended that Bowers be given the death penalty. The next day, the judge officially sentenced Robert Gregory Bowers to death. As of the time of this video, Bowers is still on death row, awaiting execution. Now I want to give the victims of this case their time. Cecil Rosenthal was 59 years old at the time of his death and was born on July 20, 1959. His brother David Rosenthal was born on June 12, 1964, making him 54 years old when he was killed. Both brothers were developmentally disabled, but that didn't stop everyone around them from loving them. It is said that the two of them were always together, and that they never missed a service at the synagogue. One of the people who also attended the services said that she is comforted to know that they died together, because knowing them, she doesn't know how one of them would live without the other. Another person who knew the brothers, Chris Schopf, said, quote, "Cecil's laugh was infectious. David was so kind and had such a gentle spirit. Together they looked out for one another. They were inseparable. Most of all, they were kind, good people with a strong faith and respect for everyone." Unquote. 87-year-old Melvin Wax was born on November 23, 1930. He was a retired accountant and was said to have been a pillar of his congregation. He made an effort to get to know his fellow synagogue goers better, even asking around to get someone's phone number so he could check on them while they were in the hospital. Melvin was known as one of the only people to show up early to every service. He would also step up to lead services when the planned speaker was unable to make it. The oldest victim was 97-year-old Rose Mallinger, who was born on March 1, 1921. She was described by everyone as a pillar in the community, who had been a part of her synagogue for over 6 decades. Her family said, quote, "The synagogue was the center of her very active life. She was there every weekend, and the people of the congregation brought her great joy as she brought to them," unquote. Rose cared for her family deeply, with them saying, quote, "She loved us and knew us better than we knew ourselves," unquote. They also said, quote, "She retained her sharp wit, humor, and intelligence until the very last day. No matter what obstacles she faced, she never complained. She did everything she wanted to do in her life," unquote. Jerry Rabinowitz was born on November 10, 1951, and was 66 years old at the time of his death. Jerry was a kind, loving, compassionate, and dedicated physician. He was described as incredibly helpful and absolutely non-judgmental, which was comforting to many of his patients. One in particular said, quote, "In the old days for HIV patients in Pittsburgh, he was the one to go to. He often held our hands without rubber gloves and always hugged us as we left his office," unquote. He went on to say, quote, "I got lucky beyond words, because when he gently told me around November 1995 that it was time to begin taking medications, there was an ACTG trial for 2 HIV medications that saved my life. Thank you, Dr. Rabinowitz, for having always been there during the most terrifying and frightening time of my life. You will be remembered by me always. You are one of my heroes," unquote. His nephew Avishai said, quote, "He always wore a bow tie. There is just something about guys who wear bow ties. Something youthful, something fun. And that is a word that definitely embodied my Uncle Jerry, fun. You know how they say there are people who just lighten up a room? You know that cliche about people whose laugh is infectious? That was Uncle Jerry. It wasn't a cliche, it was just his personality. His laughter, with his chest heaving up and down, with a huge smile on his face, that was Uncle Jerry. And that bow tie that you know made people smile, you know made his patients more at ease," unquote. Jerry sacrificed his life on the day of the shooting, desperate to tend to those who might need him. He was a hero. Daniel Stein was 71 years old, born on February 19, 1947. His family described him as a happy, caring, easygoing man who was very involved in the synagogue community. He served as a mentor and president of his congregation, and also provided services for the elderly community. He was also said to have absolutely loved his family, and took any chance he got to show off his 7-month-old grandchild. 65-year-old Richard Gottfried was born on January 13, 1953. He and his wife both held jobs as successful dentists. The two of them worked together at a local medical center's dental clinic, where they would provide their services for refugees and immigrants, many of whom had never received dental care. Richard had reconnected with his faith after the death of his father, and at one point became the president of his congregation. Joyce Feenberg was born on February 9, 1943, making her 75 years old when she was killed. She was a former research specialist, working at the University of Pittsburgh's Learning Research and Development Center from 1983 to 2008, when she finally retired. Her daughter-in-law, Marnie Feenberg, said, quote, "My mother-in-law was one of the kindest humans I've ever met. If you knew her for 5 minutes, if you knew her for 20 years, you felt exactly the same way," unquote. Marnie went on to say, quote, "She traveled extensively with her husband, and they met people internationally. She would stay in touch with them. So, there are people from 50 years ago who she met once in Australia who are her good friends. She would stay up nights making sure everybody was staying in touch. I've never seen anything like it before. I think everybody tries to do that, but she succeeds," unquote. Joyce's husband passed away in 2016, 2 years prior to her death. She kept an amazing relationship with her family and was said to have had a very close bond to her grandchildren in particular. Marnie also said, quote, "She made a point of mastering social media very early so she could stay in touch with these kids. Each one of them had a one-on-one relationship with her. She knew what was going on in their days. She was so involved. She really was an amazing, amazing grandmother." 69-year-old Irving Younger was born on July 3, 1949. He was also known to arrive early to services, but was also known to stay late. He was a dedicated worshiper, even volunteering at his synagogue regularly. He was described by his neighbor as an amazing father and grandfather. The neighbor also said, quote, "He talked about his daughter and his grandson, always, and he never had an unkind word to say about anybody," unquote. Born on August 2, 1934, Bernice Simon was killed at the age of 84. Sylvan Simon was born on June 13, 1932, and was 86 years old at the time of his death. The two of them had gotten married 62 years prior, in the very synagogue that they took their last breaths in. A neighbor of theirs said, quote, "They held hands and they always smiled, and he would open the door for her. They were really generous and nice to everybody." A longtime friend of theirs, Michael Stepaniak, described them as, quote, "A loving couple, and they've been together forever. I hope they didn't suffer much, and I miss them terribly," unquote. Please keep all of these innocent victims and their families in your thoughts. I want to thank all of you who have stuck around to the end of this video. I hope that you learned something new about this deeply saddening case. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below, but make sure to keep any bigoted thoughts out of it. I hope you guys have an amazing day, and please make sure to stay safe.